My friend is about to send a new animal that will be here in a few days.
Although I'd love to use this 10-gallon tank here that's ready to go, you know me. I'd prefer to go larger so I can include some interesting features. Now this will not be an aquarium, but luckily I have scrap materials everywhere that I could easily transform into something viable. I don't have much time though and gotta get to work.
An aspect of DIY tanks that can get annoying are the doors. However, I remembered that I had a ready-made option in storage that I got from IKEA. I thought these could make my life simpler, so I unpacked and assembled them. I took measurements of these because the entire enclosure would be built around them. Typically I prefer to use glass, but not this time. I remembered that I had PVC board left over from Tony's Vivarium, which I could manipulate faster than glass. I cut it down based on the measurements from before and drilled holes along the edges. I also had to account for the hinges. They sit just below the glass, which would create an excessive gap when installed. So I notched the front board to get a better fit. Assembling the tank is easy with PVC cement. I put the screws in the holes, apply the cement, and lock it together with the screws. These ensure the pieces are clamped tightly together while the cement fuses the boards. That said, I find it easiest to do this one board at a time.
All that work I just did would be useless if this doesn't hold water, so we gotta fill it up and hopefully it does exactly that.
I never worry about glass enclosures, but there's always a level of anxiety that comes with PVC or plywood builds.
A few hours later and it is still holding water perfectly. Obviously it's never gonna have this much in it at any given time, but you wanna do the test right and we're looking good.
I was relieved and proceeded to finish the tank. It needed a top, which I created with a different board by drilling holes at the corners and removing the middle. That was easy enough, but this butterfly kept coming around and I didn't want to harm it. Anyway, I then drilled holes as before, applied cement, and locked it down with screws. I also mixed up Bondo to fill the holes in the front. That made it look better, but unfortunately there were slight inconsistencies on the sides I had to trim off. Finally, I painted anything that would be visible. Once dry, it was looking great and ready for the doors. However, when I went to add them, I noticed a serious problem.
Unfortunately, my measurements were off and the doors are just a little bit too big for this.
So I marked around the hinges and carved out recessed areas. Definitely a little rough, but these allowed the doors to fit perfectly. I knew I'd have to paint this again for it to look as good as possible, which unfortunately pushed everything back a day while it dried. The following day I was able to address the top by simply stapling an aluminum screen around the edges. After cutting off the excess, what remained looked kind of sloppy, which is when I remembered about the seam tape from the IKEA Jungle Box. I cut it into strips and applied it along the edges. Finally, I installed the doors.
Although it has a few inconsistencies, I think it turned out pretty well, and I think it's great that I was able to build it just with stuff I already had around the house. That said, what I really want to do is get this thing scaped.
Even though I just installed the doors, I had to take them off before tipping the tank. The look I'm imagining is a few tree stumps with foliage around them. I knew this large chunk of wood was a great starting point. It was only a matter of finding where it appeared best and what pieces linked up to it. The beauty of PVC enclosures is that you can secure hardscape directly through the sides with stainless steel screws. This makes it easy to gain stability and an immediate hold without any adhesives. Once secure, I drilled holes to tie down another chunk, which I screwed to the back. I also wanted a stump on the opposing side. Only this time, I had to combine several pieces to get the desired effect. These two structures were a good starting point, but I needed something to cover the rest of the background. Tree fern panels and cork bark were an ideal solution. I later sealed off the screws with seam tape so the enclosure remains waterproof. Introducing the completed hardscape. This should be an awesome foundation for a naturalistic habitat. A component that will assist with that is wicking ropes. I weave these within areas where I want to grow moss. These will pull water up from the false bottom, which will hydrate this sphagnum moss. Although the ropes are doing the work, the moss itself is where the plants will grow. Here I pressed filter foam up behind the wood to create an overhang. Like most other vivariums, this requires a false bottom, but it must be tamper-proof. I achieved this by wrapping Metalamat with landscape fabric to create false bottom panels. Of course, all vivariums need a good substrate as well. I mixed up a blend of cocoa fiber, orchid bark, sphagnum moss, aqua soil, and sand. This will remain fluffy, be easy to dig in, and retain humidity. I filled the overhang first, which is basically a glorified planter. Then I built up a substantial layer in the bottom, including some sloped areas on the right.
The vision probably makes a little more sense now that you see it all set up, but it's going to look even better with the plants.
As usual, I thoroughly cleaned the plants, taking them down to the bare roots. This bird's nest fern immediately brought the tank to life. I really enjoyed the look of the syngonium as well. However, what really tied it all together was the creeping fig. I took it up and around until everything was in its grasp. I love the simplicity of just a few elements here and think it makes for a strong aesthetic. However, I knew it would look even better with Java moss. At this point, I remembered that I almost forgot to add charcoal, so I buried pellets throughout while I still had a chance. Then I proceeded to add a water bowl, which would be surrounded by leaf litter. For that, I went outside to collect magnolia leaves, which I boiled, allowed to cool down, and sprinkled along the top of the substrate. All things considered, this is a pretty simple design, and that was done with intention. Despite this, I still think it's effective and beautiful. The frog that's about to call this home won't be very active, nor would it use a lot of elaborate features, so I kept that in mind. That said, it is somewhat heavy-bodied and could damage delicate plants, so I selected hardy items. It will also spend all of its time on the ground, which is why I created the overhang as a planter. Not only that, but it doubles as a hiding place. All this begs the question though, what did I get? And that would be none other than a tomato frog. These are unique frogs that don't get excessively large and are fairly sedentary, so they don't require massive elaborate enclosures. That said, I tried to weave in some unique elements as I saw fit. Additionally, this was a somewhat last minute thing because it needed a new home. I did the best I could in a short amount of time, and I think this is a great example of what's possible without going too over the top. I gotta be honest, tomato frogs were never really on my radar. However, I'll admit that I already love it. I think it's pretty cool looking, I'm excited to see how it enjoys its new vivarium, and it should be a great addition to the Serpa family.